In this video, I'm going to show you how to work a front-back dividing row in a bottom-up garment. And I'll be using my Azalea top here as the example. As you can see, I've knit the hem and I've knit all of the body, and so I'm now at the dividing row of the pattern. The first step in a dividing row is usually to first work a certain number of stitches. In Azalea here, for the size I'm knitting, it says to knit 120 stitches. It'll be a different number for you depending on the size that you're knitting. So I'm gonna first go ahead and start knitting until I've knit 120 stitches. So I've knit my 120 stitches, and I did just recount it to make sure. It's always good to do that. The next instruction says to place the stitches just worked on holder for back. So that means those 120 stitches that I just knit, so from the end here to where I started at the beginning of the round, need to now be transferred onto a holder. When I have a large number of stitches like this, I use a piece of scrap yarn as my holder. I recommend using a yarn that is either the same weight as the yarn you're working with or thinner. I also recommend using a yarn that isn't hairy, like an alpaca or mohair or anything that could shed onto your fabric. I have some leftover, this is a superwash merino that is sport weight. So that is my scrap yarn, and it's really long. So I usually cut a really, really long piece to start, and you can always trim it afterwards. And I have it threaded through my tapestry needle. So to transfer the 120 stitches I just worked, I'm going to start on the end where I just finished knitting. So where my working yarn is at. So right on this end here. And I'm going to insert my tapestry needle into the first stitch, just like this, and transfer it onto the tapestry needle. And I'm just going to go ahead and do that for every stitch. So I'll just continue in this manner until I get back to my beginning of round marker. Here's a tip. If it's not comfortable for you to transfer this way with your tapestry needle in your left hand, you can turn the work over so that the wrong side is facing you. And this way, your tapestry needle is now in your right hand, and you might be able to transfer the stitches more quickly. Okay, I'm just about to the beginning of the round marker here. And then I'm gonna turn the work back over since I had flipped it to the wrong side because I just found that it to be a little bit easier for me. And so then I'm going to pull the scrap yarn through. And at this point, you can remove this beginning of round marker. In the Azalea pattern, it says to not remove it until you finish the rest of that round, but likely it's gonna fall off anyway, so you might as well just take it off now. Okay, so now we can look at this, and all of the stitches on half of the body are now on this long piece of scrap yarn, just like this. So at this point, this is when I would usually trim off the ends since it's quite long. Sometimes what I'll do is I'll just tie a very loose bow like this, just to kind of keep everything secured like that. So then the final instruction in the dividing row says to knit to the end. So we have to find where we had left off again. So here, look for where your working yarn is. So here is our working yarn, and it is attached. That last stitch was one of the ones that was transferred, and that's how it's supposed to look. But now we'll situate our needles here, and now we're going to be knitting to the end, which is going to be over here to the last stitch that is still on the circular needle. So you'll just take the other end of the needle, and here's our working yarn, and I'll just insert the needle into this stitch here, and I will start knitting. So now I will knit to the end. Okay, so I've just about reached the end of the round here. I've knit the last stitch. And so now our dividing round is complete. So now we have half of our body stitches on the scrap yarn, and we'll just be working on the other half, which in the case of Azalea here is the front of the garment. So at this point, we go from knitting in the round to knitting back and forth flat. This is an important change for two reasons. One is we'll still be working in stockinette stitch, but now that we're working flat, it means that we'll knit on right side rows and purl on wrong side rows. And because of this, so number two, because of this, some people's tension may change a little. If you are a person who finds that their in the round gauge is much tighter than their flat gauge, you may see this difference in tension. If so, I often recommend using two different needle sizes when you change to knitting flat. You use your regular needle on the right side rows and then use a needle size smaller on wrong side rows. That's just a little tip if you find that your flat tension is dramatically different than your in the round tension. So that is how you work a front back dividing row and a bottom up garment like my Azalea top.